All right. Hello, everybody. All right. Here we are. We made it. We made it so far. This is already an accomplishment. It's certainly an accomplishment for me to be here today. I'm exhausted and spiritually and physically from Rosh Hashanah. I hope you are as well. I think we should be a little bit like battered and in good and bad ways exhausted, right? This is supposed to be a trying experience, an intense experience, let's say, at least that. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, this journey, we're in Aseret Yemei Tshuva, like we're in this really holy period. And there are, I hope some of you are with us for Rosh Hashanah and whatever way that you could be. There's all kinds of ways to be with us these days. But coming and being with us in LA if you can is the best of all. I love to see folks and be able to celebrate the new year with you. If you are in LA, I'll say one announcement. We have a Tashlich ceremony on Sunday at the beach, and it's one of our really special moments of the year. Really, you should really come. Okay. What else can I say? Oh, one other announcement. I must say, I guess I should start saying this, that I've been saying this for like years, but I do think that I have a book coming out this fall on the Parsha. I do think it'll be out by Bereshit. So I guess I should start talking about it now, and it'll be like you'll hear about it as ad nauseum for me this year as I try to trot it around. And I may trot around and see, hopefully visit some of you. I'll try to like do a little touring and teaching just for fun. But it's something that I've been working on for a long time, and mostly I'm just like trying to I'm still there's edits still happening, but it's ready. The publisher's ready. It's going to go out. So I hope, God willing, right? Like I'm davening in shul hard for, safe passage into the new year in all kinds of ways. So stay tuned for that book. It's called Parshanut or Parshanut, actually, as is the way it's usually pronounced. I mean, the people usually pronounce it. Okay, Torah. Okay, so here we are in the middle of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and everything, the entire Jewish consciousness is focused on this spiritual experience, and well, it should be. But because of that, something terrible happens, which is that these last Parshot of the Torah get forgotten. These last Parshot, and they're vital. Of course, the Torah, the greatest book of all time, does not end on like a flat note. I mean, these last Parshot are very intentionally, there's a very clear structure of events that are happening. In brief, I will say, last week we looked at Parshat Nitzavim, and that was the sealing of the covenant. Everything that had been heard so far, let's agree to it. This week, we're going to talk about what happens in Parshat Vayeilech is the writing down of the Torah. Huge deal. Huge deal. And that's what we're going to be talking about today in a particular way. Next week, Parshat Hazinu is the other great poem of the Torah, or song of the Torah. The one is the song of the sea, which Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Yisrael, which is in our prayers, but Hazinu is the other great kind of section of the Torah entirely in verse. Moses's great last song to the people, magnificent, scary, lots to talk about there. And then the last Parsha of the Torah, which really gets lost because we don't even have a week assigned to it. We read it during Simchas Torah. The last Parsha of the Torah is a blessing. It's a blessing. Moshe's blessing to all the tribes of Israel. It's like everything there is grand and magnificent, and it just gets lost in the shuffle. Because how can we not talk about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Well, I'm going to talk about Parshat Vayeilech today, and I'm not going to relate it at all to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. No, I mean, and we'll see where it lands with our spiritual kind of lives, of course. But what's really critical is that we understand some of what's going on in Parsha Vayeilech, because it's actually foundational material, because it helps us think about one of the foundational questions in Jewish theology, which is, what is the written legacy of Moses, or of that time, or of that chapter in our existence as a people? What is that? And that becomes a very important theological defining point for lots of Jewish communities and thinkers, but it's not clear. It's not clear at all. And part of the dilemma is that in the midst of all of this writing of Torah, there's also the discussion of writing something else down, and that is a shirah, a poem. And we're going to hear about the writing of these two things, and kind of dance a little bit between them to try and figure out, wait, what's being written down and why? Okay, so that's our project today, and I hope it'll help us better understand what Torah might be, what poetry might represent for our people, and maybe above all, what writing means for us. And there is, that's an important topic. That's an important topic. And I guess I'll signal there is one note there that already like plucks a chord of the Yamim Noraim, which is that we are written into the book of life, God willing. We're written, and that language of writing it's a metaphor we use in this tradition, to be written into something, and that's a powerful way. We say now to each other, Gemar Chatima Tova, may what was written down be sealed. Like it's like the consecrated writing of something. That's a big deal. Okay, now I'm like teaching the whole class before I teach the whole class. Okay, so let's say a blessing. Oh, it's an intense time of year. So let's try to center ourselves in Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thanks to God for always giving us this space to return to this book, and to live in it. Okay, so let's take a look. What I want to do today with you, I'm going to set this up a little bit, and then we'll need your help for sure to figure out what these two primary words mean in context here. But let me set this up a little bit. I want to set it up by referring to a piece of Talmud that I have spoken about before, and it's a very, very powerful, important piece of Talmud. It was a piece we did that really inspired a whole way of looking at the Torah, because it is the punchline, I'll tell you, is that one of the voices in this piece of Talmud suggests that the whole Torah is a poem, and that's a powerful. That lens is so powerful for thinking about how we read the Torah, and we often do read the Torah, even though it often speaks in prose. We read it like, oh, every word is like hitting us with a rhythm, like a poem, and it's written rhythmically. And there are lots of theories about just how much of the Torah is meant to be a poem. A lot of it sounds rhythmic. We chant it to a rhythm, right? So this is a whole framework for thinking about the Torah. But in the Talmud itself, it's a debate of two ways of reading what's going on here. And I want to just give you the debate, and then we'll go into the Parsha and understand both of those readings. I actually think both of them are really important for us to hold on to, not just that the Torah is a poem, but actually the other position, which is that the Torah and poetry are two different things. Okay, so let's take a look. Here is a source sheet for you all. Okay, so here we are. Let's start now with this Gemara in Nadarium. That's where we're starting. Okay, can I make this bigger? I can. Okay, Gemara Nadarium, starting up at the top here. Nadarim, which means vows, but along the way, there's a discussion in Nadarium. It's the background here is sort of like in an intricate one, which we don't need to get into. There's talking about what exactly Moses received and whether Moses received it before the rest of the children of Israel received it. But anyway, at a certain point, one of the verses they summon is a verse in this week's Parsha. And the verse is, Va'ata kitvu lechem et hashira hazot. And now write for yourselves this poem. And by the way, that's in the plural. So that's also, I shouldn't hide that. That's also part of what's yourselves, right? For yourselves, this poem, and teach it to the children of Israel. The word shira, we're going to just hang on. It would be a mistake to translate this as poem or song, because in English you lose the combo. And in the ancient Hebrew, poem song is sort of the same thing. The recitation of poetry was a form of musical expression. And yeah. Okay, so write this poem down and teach it to the children of Israel. We'll get there. That is a verse in this week's Torah reading. Okay, and one opinion here is, no, what that means is just the poem. Just the poem. Now, what do they mean by that? This opinion saying, when the Torah says, write down this poem, it's referring just to the poem itself. What they mean is Parshat Hazinu, right? We just mentioned it. Parshat Hazinu is entirely in the form of a poem, okay? But the other opinion says, no, because the rest of that verse, right? Look, it's the same verse. The rest of that verse says, because I want this Shirah to be a witness to me among the children of Israel. I want this poem to be a witness to me. And that opinion is saying, wait a minute. If the Shirah is going to be a witness, this poem's not the witness. The whole Torah is the witness. Now, why that is, we'll see eventually. But the point of this position is that write down this poem must mean the entire Torah, because it's going to be a witness, and it's just a kind of it's a poetic way of referring to the Torah, is to call it a poem. Okay, that's this position. But the other position is that the poem itself is Parshat Hazinu. Okay, is that all clear so far? Okay. Let's just see your faces. Okay, so two positions there, and let me just to make the first position. We're going to go back and read through the relevant sections, but I'm going to skip a little bit to the end. I want you to just see that the first position, which is that the writing down this poem actually refers to the poem that we see next week. It makes a lot of sense because scroll. This is the end of Moses recited the words of this Shirah in the ears of the whole congregation of Israel to the very end. That's the last line of our Parsha. And the next week's Parsha, Parshat Hazinu, is Hazinu Hashamayim V'Adabeira, V'Tishma Ha'aretz Imrei Fi. Give ear, O heavens, let me speak. Let the earth hear the words I utter. May my discourse come down as the rain. Ya'arav kamatar likhi, Tizal katal imrati. My speech distill as the dew. So beautiful stuff. And you can see then why this Shira seems like it must be referring to this. That's in some ways the obvious way to read it. Okay, but I want to explain as we go why it's not so obvious, and why the other position that the whole Torah is the poem is not just a beautiful thing to say, but actually a fairly plausible reading of what's happening in this week's Parsha, okay? So we'll get there. We'll pause along the way for interpretation. Let's do one more piece before we do that, because I want to start giving us words to think about. And the first primary word is, it's a big one, the word Torah. Okay, just the word Torah. So let's take a running start here and look at how we're introduced to the idea, the very big idea that there is a Torah at all, and that it's a written thing. All right, so let's take a look. Okay, scrolling all the way back. Here we are. Okay, I want this is last week's Parsha. Okay, in last week's Parsha, we see a mention of something that Moshe has been doing more and more as the book of Deuteronomy comes to a close. You'll find it in earlier Parshot as well. And but in Nitzavim, it's like he says it a lot. And so this phrase is important for us as well. Look at him saying, the Eternal will grant you abounding prosperity in all your undertakings, in your issue from the womb, the offspring of your cattle, and your produce from the soil, for the Eternal will again delight in your well-being as in that of your ancestors. Nice to have some blessing verses to start with here. Since you will be heeding the Eternal your God and keeping the divine commandments and laws that are recorded, haktuva, written, it should say written here, because that's what we're thinking about, that are written in the haktuva b'sefer haTorah hazeh, in this book of the Torah. So Moshe's referring to this book of the Torah. Now, what is the Torah? Well, the word Torah means teaching, or sometimes it's translated as instruction, like a teaching that guides you in a particular direction. Okay, because the word is related to the word for guidance, like an arrow, goes in a certain direction, or like a teacher points you, or a parent points you in a certain direction, instructs you. Okay, so the guide, the teaching or instruction. Okay, so that's Torah, the book of this instruction, and presumably that means, look, the commandments and laws. Commandments and laws. So one way to think of this is that it's a record of what you're supposed to do. Okay, and once you return to the eternal God with all your heart and soul, all this good stuff will happen. Okay, that's just a little background, that we have this phrase, the book of the Torah. And now I'm going to start asking you a question that I want you turning over in your head. What's in the book of the Torah as you read here? What do you think is in that book? What's Moses talking about? Write it down. Okay, and then this week Moses actually does it. Okay, and this is the important line, maybe the most important line in our Parsha, maybe the most important line, some could argue, in the Torah. Okay, not the next one, but verse 9. Okay, so let's take a look. This is towards the beginning of our Parsha, and Moses called Joshua and all and said to him in the sight of all of Israel, Chazak ve'amatz, be strong and resolute. We say that to each other, Chazak ve'amatz. For it is you who will go with these people into the land that the Eternal swore to their fathers to give them, and it's you who shall apportion it to them, and it is indeed the Eternal who will go before you. God will be with you, and will not fail you or forsake you. Fear not and be not dismayed. Lo tira velo techat. Okay? Big declaratory stuff. And I will say that Parshat Vayeilech it's like the artistry of Parshat Vayeilech it's a little dizzying, because it goes back and forth from Moshe saying, it's as if he's like writing something down and then looking up and saying, you be strong, everybody, you do this, yeah, you go forward, Joshua, people, everybody. And then it has him writing again. And then it has him lifting up and talking to Joshua again. And then it has him writing again. And then I almost cited the entire Parsha because I wanted to show you that, but I get carried away. So I'm going to restrain myself, but trust me that in between all these sections, you'll hear this again and again. Joshua, go for it. Joshua, people of Israel, go for it. You're going to be great. Not always such a positive tone, but like strong, be strong, be strong. Okay. And then comes this line. And here's the line. Vayichtov Moshe et haTorah hazot v'yitna el hakohanim bnei Levi hanosim et Aaron brit Hashem vet kol ziknei Yisrael. Moses wrote down this Torah and gave it to the priests, the sons of Levi, who carried the ark of the covenant of the Eternal, and to all the elders of Israel. Okay. So now we really have something to ask, right? I earlier, it's a little bit speculative. This Torah, I don't know, you just say what do you think the book of Torah means as a phrase? But now we have a scene, and Moshe wrote down this Torah, and remember, the word Torah means teaching or instruction. So the the translation I first had said Moses wrote down this teaching. I changed it back to Torah. But what is this teaching? What did Moshe write down there? And you can see already that a minimalist reading is quite possible. Like it could just be this, the last thing he said. Or it could be the next thing he's going to say. Is there a colon after this? Or is it a reference to what came above? Or is it a reference to literally everything that came above? Okay. And then I'll read just the next part because it also has to do with the written document. And Moses then commanded them as follows. Not instructed, commanded. I'm frustrated with it's hard to keep track of the subtlety in the language if you use the same word over and over again. So, and Moses commanded them as follows. Vayetzav Moshe otam lemor. Every 7th year, the year set for remission, the Shemitah year, at the festival of Sukkot, when all Israel comes to appear before the eternal your God, in the place that God will choose, you shall read this Torah aloud. Okay? You gather together on Sukkot every 7 years and read this Torah, again, et Torah hazot. Read it aloud in the presence of all Israel. Now, what should be read at a what is it, septicentennial gathering? Okay, so gather the people, men, women, children, and the stranger in your community, everybody, that they may hear and so learn to revere the eternal your God and to observe faithfully every word of this Torah, the Torah hazot. And that is starting to sound like that must be the whole Torah. It can't possibly be like they're just supposed to read this, right? What are they supposed to read? And their children too, who have not had the experience, shall hear and learn to revere, because they weren't there, but now they'll re-experience it. Now, this ceremony is called Hakel, the gathering. Great for us Torah lovers. It's just a great ceremony because it's like just gather together everybody in the nation just to hear the Torah. Now, it might have been a little bit rough to hear it sitting. I mean, even on Shabbos, it feels long sometimes, right? Like the entire Torah. But okay, let's pause. Finally, I've been talking for a while, haven't I? So let's pause. What is the Torah that Moses wrote down? And what is the Torah that is to be read? What do you think we're referring to right now? And is that Torah going in the ark? It looks almost like it's going in the ark, right? So what's this Torah? Okay, what's this Torah and what's this reading? Okay, let's start with Richard.
Thank you. Being a literalist, I've always assumed that to read this Torah, this teaching, this book, Sefer HaTorah, means the book of Deuteronomy, because it encapsulates everything, number one. And number two, didn't they say that the practice was initiated by, or reinitiated by Ezra and Nehemiah?
Yeah, yeah.
In an afternoon. So I don't think they were reading the entire 5 books, at least from later descriptions.
C'est phenomenal. Richard, is such an incisive commentator, just like really cuts to the heart of it, and bringing a lot of great knowledge to the table also, because Richard is, I love that you read that literally or intuitively, that the Torah refers to the book of Deuteronomy. I didn't make that, that wasn't my intuition. I didn't make that leap, but it is in fact the way the rabbis understood the mitzvah, the gathering of Hakel, I thought it was, I read that and I think, oh, it must be the whole Torah, but it's because I'm so used to thinking of the 5 books of Moses as the Torah. But Richard's saying this teaching, it must be the whole of the thing that Moshe's been saying to the people, because that's what Deuteronomy is Moshe's last speech to the people. So it must mean everything from, Deuteronomy on. And just take a look at what Rashi says. Baruch shekivanta Blessed are you whose mind went in the same direction as Rashi's. Here's what Rashi says. Read this Torah, Tikrat Torah Zot. The king read from the beginning of the section, Eile Hadvarim. Read from, these are the words. In other words, Deuteronomy 1:1. As is set forth in Tractate Sota, I believe it's even in the Mishnah, that is the earliest rabbinic code has read this exactly the way Richard has. Like, this must mean what Moses said, this book, and therefore when Moshe's saying all along this book, you know, that also might just mean Deuteronomy. Okay, now let's go back a little bit before I could keep going with the commentators, but I see a lot of hands up. So let's hear from some more folks. Louis.
Yeah, so it says that they're going to read whatever we consider the Torah, right? At Sukkot when people have gathered together. I assume that refers to Regalim, right? So Sukkot is a Regalim holiday, so everyone would come to Jerusalem, offer sacrifices, or the appointed place. Is
That's
there
right. Like a pilgrimage, in other words, a festival pilgrimage? Yes.
Sure. In some ways, couldn't you determine length? Couldn't you determine what was being read sort of by determining time period in which was read? So if it was just one day where you appeared before God, you had to kind of fit whatever you were reading to one day and then intersperse with sacrifices. Has there ever been commentary saying this is how long they were there, therefore they could have only read X amount or Y amount?
I should have looked that up. That's a great question. Like, I would love to see some commentary on how long did it take, because you're sensitive to something Richard was also just mentioning, which is that this has to be a manageable ceremony. They did it in a day, or, you know, I mean, the truth is they had more than a day, because Sukkot, they had the week-long festival, and I don't think that it means they read it on but rather in the middle of the week, right? So like the first days of Sukkot are holidays, and yes, you'd be doing all those sacrifices, and then in the middle of the week, there's all kinds of ceremonies, the ceremony of water drawing, Simchat Beit HaShueva, and Hakel as well. But I should have brushed up on my knowledge of how that ceremony went. But it's a good question, and it does, like, again, to read the entire Torah, I mean, you know, like, it might have meant something very different to those people than it means to us, and there's something powerful about the thought of it, but it would be rather burdensome. The entire people, remember, millions of people gathered together to, you know, children also, and they're just listening for hours and hours. It's just like, so there's that. This is a good argument as well. Okay, does anyone reading this differently, that it isn't Deuteronomy? Yael.
I think it means the whole Torah, Shebichtav and Sheba'al Peh.
Ooh.
So I think it means the whole Tanakh. I mean, all of this rich, deep teaching of a path on which to lead our lives. And it's not literally this what's written down, but rather this whole teaching, this whole spiritual teaching. And I don't think it's specified that only one verse at a time needs to be read. You could almost have different people reading different parts of the Tanakh and even the Talmud at the same time. So it would come as this orchestra at once.
Okay, so talk about this is great, because Yael actually gives us a couple of answers. At first I thought what Yael was giving us is the most kind of like the most sort of orthodox answer. I don't even mean the movement. I just mean the most like sort of classic theological position, which is that the Torah refers to Torah Shebiksav, the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses. Right? But then Yael said something much bigger, which is like, no, that and everything else. In other words, the entirety. There's something about this language that sounds to Yael like, write down this whole tradition. Just get everything that we've been doing, everything that we are, everything that I know from God. That's a way to read this. Is Moshe at the end of his life is like, we got to get this all down. We got to get this all down. That's a beautiful reading, Yael. This is a beautiful reading. I want to return to the thing I thought you were going to say, though, because let's hear that opinion as well in the voice of Nachmanides, the Ramban. Okay, remember Rashi said, like Richard, it's just the book of Deuteronomy. Nachmanides is going to say, like Yael first suggested, that it's the whole written Torah, and here's a precise formulation of what that will mean to rabbinic theology. Ramban on Deuteronomy says, and Moses wrote down this Torah. And note that he is referring to an earlier verse. Rashi's thinking about the gathering. Read this Torah. But there was an earlier verse. Let's just remind ourselves. There's a gathering where they read the Torah, but Moses wrote down this Torah, and that's a different verse. So Ramban is saying Moses wrote down this Torah from the beginning of Bereshit, from the first word in the beginning. Bereshit is the Hebrew for in the beginning, to in the sight of all Israel, Le'nei Chol Israel, which is the last words of the Torah. First words of Genesis, last words of Deuteronomy. That's it. That's the Torah. Moshe wrote them all. This becomes a kind of pillar, foundation stone for a certain kind of Jewish theology. Okay. And then the Ramban goes on to say, we're not going to read this, but he's like, I know that there's an idea. He can't really contradict the rabbis who Rashi's citing. Those are earlier rabbis than him. So he says, I know there's this idea that you only read Deuteronomy, and that's true for the ceremony. That Torah is being used in a different way there. But this is the whole Torah. The whole Torah. Okay. All right. So now we have some ideas of what Torah might mean. I'm so excited to see Yonatan today. How you doing? I'm always happy to hear his brilliance, but it's nice to see your ponim as well. And Shana Tova, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what this Torah is.
Matt and I are having some fun in the chat about biblical criticism and whether we believe the Torah's narration, which of course I do and Matt doesn't, and that's okay.
Amen to all that. Yes.
Yeah. So Rabbi, you've been teaching classes that I've attended for about 4 years now, and they've really changed the way that I see Revelation. I don't think I landed quite where you are theologically, but where I have landed, at least for the time being, is that I think the Torah, capital T Torah, the Masoretic text, the 5 books of Moses, is a singular revelation that was given in a singular way to Moses at Sinai, but that Moses, and then by extension the people, weren't quite ready to receive it at one time, and that the process of them putting quill to parchment and practice was an evolution that, at least in the literal sense, concludes in this section of the Torah. So we know there was some proto-Torah before Moses, because we have some indications that the early prophets, including Noah, knew what was in the Torah, right? We know that Noah knew, for example, which animals were kosher and which weren't kosher. And that's in Genesis. That's before Sinai ever happened. We know that when Moses received the revelation at Sinai, there's a very small bit of law that he then bathed the people in bull's blood and said, this is the law, right? And we're done. And they weren't done. And so the process keeps going and growing with the people as they grow. And then I think we encounter the greatest paradox, which is Moses writes his own death, right? And he writes it with some fair amount of detail. Just today, I happened to go down a rabbit hole looking into like rabbinic opinions of how it is possible that Moses, if we accept this premise that Moses sat down and wrote the entire Torah, how it happens that he wrote his own death. And there's a dispute between the rabbis in the Midbar Rabbah, where some say that actually the part of the Torah where Moses dies, Joshua wrote it. And there's a different camp that says Moses wrote it, but he was crying the whole time. And then there's another great commentary that came in the 16th century from, I pulled up the guy's name. Where is it? Menachem Zeria of Fano, an Italian rabbi of the 16th century, who said, Well, really what happened was that on his last living day, Moses wrote 13 Torah scrolls. And that would explain your comment about how he keeps writing and then getting up and saying stuff and then coming back and writing. For sure that we get some explanation on that.
Wow.
But 12 of the
Wow.
Torah scrolls he left incomplete for Joshua to write in his death. And then this one that he gave to the Kohanim to put in the ark, not only did he write while crying, but it was actually his tears turned black and they wrote the last 8 verses of the book of Deuteronomy. All this by way of saying, just because I believe that the entire Torah was given to Moses at Sinai doesn't mean that I believe Moses received the entire Torah at Sinai. I do think he wrote the entire Torah in this Parsha. So that's my stand.
Yonason, it is such a bracha to have your Torah in this space. Nice to see your face along with it today, but it's really panim shel Torah. You gave us just so much just now. It's nice. It's like there's a lot there that I wonder if I would have had the chance to say. So thanks for doing a little teaching for me. And there's a lot there that I didn't know. That is just so that 13 books and the way it accounts for this sort. That's very beautiful. You know, someone said to me over the holiday, they said, "Oh, it's so nice that you teach these classes and give people space to talk." You know, and I was like, I'm not like, this is not a kindness. I'm not like, like I create a space because it just like makes people feel good to hear themselves. It's like, this is how learning is. We learn from each other. You know what I mean? It's like, if I just talk the whole time, it's like, I don't know. It's just like, why didn't I write a blog post? Like we have to learn together. So we give each other space so that we can learn from each other. And thanks for teaching us, Yonatan. Thanks for teaching me. That's beautiful and reminds me, I'll just add one more thought to that of a teaching in the Talmud that is again another debate of how the Torah was given. And one says Torah kula nitna, the Torah was given as one, the whole 5 books of Moses, like Nachmanides is saying. And the other one says, accounting for things like Moses coming back down and seeming to declare the revelation and then going back up again. And the whole Torah is written as Moses getting more and more revelation. The other one says Torah migilot nitna. So the Torah was given in various scrolls, one after another. Moses is writing this down his whole life, right? And just every time it says, and the Torah uses the word Torah hazot, this instruction, in lots of different sections, and now I've got some more Torah for you. And now I've got some more Torah. Write this Torah down as well. Write this Torah down as well. Okay? So beautiful stuff. We have 2 other things that we need to do before we finish. So I'm going to move on, but I have to give Matt a chance to respond because Yonatan was just in dialogue with Matt. So I wonder if Matt's got anything to say in response.
Yeah, I do, because I do come from a completely different notion of how this worked and what happened. From my understanding, the sort of current best thought is that Deuteronomy was written first as a standalone book. It was then expanded into the other 4. And then these are the things that, and I got it wrong because Yonatan's knowledge is like so beyond mine, that were found in the basement and brought up, except for that probably never happened either. Anyway, the point being, the text is saying this Torah because it's referring to Deuteronomy. But I think we can really, going beyond that, it's saying this Torah because that's the whole thing. And if the whole thing is now 5 books instead of 1, it's still saying that. So while I'm saying the history is different, I really think that what the meaning there is the 5 books. Because once we've made those 5 books our Torah, that's what it's talking about.
Blessed is your Torah in this space, Matt. Blessed is your Torah. I'm so like such a sophisticated way of both of you in dialogue with one another, disagreeing, but such a sophisticated way of putting a different kind of position, which is that who knows how we got the Torah that we have in front of us. Certainly it happened across a historical span, but so when we look at what it means in Deuteronomy that Moshe is saying this book. Moshe is referring to Deuteronomy, and that's the position that the rabbis themselves accepted even within the simple understanding of this text. But now we can think about how that then positions Deuteronomy as a kind of a separate book from the rest of the Torah. What point in that history someone said, Deuteronomy is the last book of 5 books that we're stringing together in this way, right? Some would say that moment happened on Mount Sinai, and some would say it happened during like the kingdom of David. But whenever it happened, it created that was a revelation. Like that, it created this moment of the 5 books, and that became a paradigm for our people that we're all like jangling around and trying to fix. Some people unraveling, and some people finding nothing but connection in. But the 5 books is that's our space, that's our playground, right? That's the Torah that we know. And yet, like how we and here's the Matt's point, not just the sophistication of it, but the important way that it needs to be read into the Torah is that, again, we have all of these different kinds of references to what Moses is doing, thinking about, teaching. Deuteronomy itself seems like a different kind of book than the rest of the Torah. So we have to understand this in the context of Deuteronomy's own narrative and its depiction of Moshe's life and his speech and his record as a prophet. Imagine for a moment, it's like almost like it becomes like heresy, because the 5 books become so sacred. But imagine for a moment that we refer to the 4 books of the Torah and then the prophet Moses, who wrote the book Deuteronomy, right? Just like the prophet Isaiah wrote the book Isaiah. Like imagine, biblical critics are like, no, 2 Isaiahs. But you imagine that concept, that way of framing it. Okay, this is also beautiful, and now we're getting. I'm beginning to fear we won't get to the end here. So let me push us a little bit forward. We've done great work on writing down the Torah. We could stop the class now, and it would have been Dayenu. But there's another thing that Moshe is writing down here. And remember that the earlier debate, right? The earlier debate, the debate over whether the entire Torah was a poem or whether the poem is Hazina. Well, here's where that debate comes from. So Moses has written whatever down. Moses is reading whatever, Deuteronomy, the whole Torah, right? We're playing with both of those paradigms and others, Megillot. Here is then. Now check this out. I told you, right, that it goes back and toggles back and forth between writing and talking to Joshua. Yonatan gave me such a beautiful frame for that. So here's verse 13, and their children who have not had the experience shall hear and learn to revere the eternal God as long as they live in the land of Israel. You're about to cross the Jordan and possess. Verse 14, which I omitted, is Moses picks his head up and says, Joshua, be strong again. And then 14, 15, 16, Moshe's talking to Joshua. I could even show you. 14. Yeah. Then Moses says, the time is drawing near for you to die. Or God said to Moses, time is drawing near for you to die. Call Joshua and present himself. And so Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves. So a different kind of interlude. Joshua and Moshe have this encounter with God for 3 verses, and Moshe is about to die. And then back to our narrative, or not really narrative, back to our writing. And the Eternal said to Moses, you're soon to lie with your ancestors. The people will then go astray after the alien gods in their midst in the land that they are about to enter, and they will forsake me and break my covenant that I made with them. Okay, a little doom, right? Moshe is a stormy figure, and he gave us some blessing at the outset, but here's a little doom. And they shall be ready, pray, and many evils and troubles shall befall them. And they shall say on that day, surely it is because our God is not in our midst that these evils have befallen us. And I will keep my countenance hidden on that day because of all the evil they've done in turning to other gods. Bit of a bummer. Therefore, va'ata, now, write down this shirah. Write down, because of all of this, write down this song, this poem, and teach it to the people of Israel. Put it in their mouths in order that this poem may be my witness against the people of Israel, or my witness upon the people of Israel. It's not so clear. In order, le'ed bivnei Israel, a witness for, not really a witness upon, I guess against, yeah, because maybe it'll testify to all these things. I don't know. But the poem is going to be a witness. And when I bring them into the land flowing with milk and honey, etc., etc., etc. Oh, sorry. You know what? I should read it. When I bring them into the land flowing with milk and honey that I promised on oath to their ancestors, and they eat their fill and grow fat and turn to other gods and serve them, spurning me and breaking my covenant, and the many evils and troubles befall them, then this shirah, this poem, shall confront them as a witness, since it will never be lost from the mouths of their offspring. For I know what plans they're devising even now before I bring them into the land that I promised on oath. And that day, Moshe wrote down this shirah, this poem, this song, and taught it to the Israelites. Okay. Now, that's a lot of reading, but let's just pause and make sure we absorbed what was happening there. Write down this poem, write down this poem. That's what we really need for our conversation. But why write down this poem? What does it mean that it will be a witness? What is that? Noah's had his hand up for a while, but I don't know if this is the right moment for you, Noah. Do you want me to come back to you in a bit?
Yeah, this is fine on that point. Write down this poem. I think this part's really talking to Moses's heart so he can see the blessings, whatever else he hasn't said yet, and deliver it in sort of a song fashion so that as the people go, they can remember the melody and then the words, so that that teaching's always with them and they can go back to it when they remember the melody, or they can forget it and go about and then come back much later, like Chuba.
Good. Okay, excellent, Noah. So Noah begins to help us understand how shirah, a poem, might be an entirely different thing. Not entirely different. Yeah, I don't want to put words in Noah's mouth, but that it serves a particular function. And there might be a thing called the poem, the song, the great song of Israel, Hazinu, after all, right? That's what we're the poem of that will make up next week's Parsha. And it's there because it serves it's different than having a Torah. Torah is great. We read through the Torah and it tells us what to do, and we study it all the days of our lives, et cetera, et cetera. Great. But a poem's a little bit different. It's like anytime you're faltering or failing or in misery, then you begin to sing the old song. Right? Hazinu Hashamayim. You began to sing the old song, and it is a reminder to you, right? It's a reminder to you that in a way that gets into your system. It has a rhythm, right? Hazinu Hashamayim v'adabeira, right? Like it's a so you need a poem also, and this is part of where I wanted to get to in this class, is that there's some idea here that they're separate things. The Torah and the song are two separate things. Very lovely to say all of the Torah is a poem, but maybe they're different. Maybe there's a Torah which is the record of the people, of their wanderings and their laws and their ways of life, and just recording everything down. But there's something else that we need written down throughout the generations to study, and that is our song, the song of our people, the poem of our people, right? And that's powerful too. Or let me take one more thought here, counting down. Oh, well, no, you know what? We have 8 minutes. Let's see what we can do with 8 minutes. I'm sure we can do marvelous stuff with 8 minutes as script. Jen.
I love that we don't really know. Like this whole conversation of like, did he mean just this section, or did he mean this whole section, or what? I love it. And it reminds me of grad school. Like the first day of grad school, I was assigned a 400-page book that I was absolutely never gonna have time to read. And the whole class freaked out, and everybody was like, do I just read this chapter, or do we read this? Do I do extra research to understand what the book's about? And the next week we got there, and what the professor told us is that was the entire point. The entire point was for you to have to figure out what in the book was important, what in the book you needed to engage with at this particular time, how you can understand the book, how you needed to read the book in order to come back. And I didn't tell you because you needed to learn how to do that yourself. So like, to me, the vagueness, because in poetry, things are left vague on purpose too. is meant to make us engage with this, to have to define Torah and then redefine Torah, to have to, engage with it in a very active way and like getting kind of meta. That's the poem. Like the hermeneutic is the song. Our relationship with it is the art of it.
Oh, I love you. I just love having you in this group. You have such a different way of thinking than I do, and it's always just so startlingly insightful. That is such a fantastic way of thinking about the Torah. Now, let me just say, it's different than a more classical theology which is that every word of the Torah is equally valuable and enduring at all times, equally relevant to us. But Jen gives us a little bit of a different vision, which is that different parts of the Torah are pulsing up at different times and like shouting to us at different times. The Torah is a collection of all kinds of different Torahs. All kinds of different Torahs. And just think about the way that Leviticus must have been the most important book at some chapters in our history, and then feels sometimes like the least important book at other chapters in our history. Now, again, some would say, no, ever as important. But is it really? And is Deuteronomy as important to us as it was to the people just about to cross? Right? What Torah do we need in this moment? That framework asks us to wonder about. What is our Torah? What's the Torah that's erupting, emerging, seizing us in this age, right? And what was the Torah in this moment for Moshe? What was the most important thing? It was the things that Moshe was saying right now. This particular, and Jen's twist at the end. And what is the interpretation we need in this age? What's the way of looking at Torah that we need in this? What's the framework for what it is that we call Torah that means something to us? The rabbis didn't just insist that the 5 books of Moses were the Torah and every word of them the divine word of God just for no reason. They didn't just arbitrarily. It's like that vision of the Torah made sense to them, or was necessary to them, or served their spiritual needs for a particular mode of interpretation, for a particular response to their history, for a particular experience of the Torah that they were seeking, right? And what experience of the Torah are we seeking? Okay. All right. We have one more pass here. And in this last pass, what I want to do is I want to play on something else Jen said, which is the indeterminacy of it all. Our inability to actually, and this is, I agree with Jen here. This is part of the beauty of the Torah, is that it leaves itself mysterious. It's not clear what it's doing. Okay, here is the last passage that we'll look at today that I think suggests or helps us understand why it is a little confusing distinguishing between the Torah and the song, and why that other opinion in the Talmud, in fact, suggests they're all one and the same. Just look at the language here of the end of Parshat Vayeilech. Remember, Moses wrote down the song and taught it to the Israelites, and Moses had written down the Torah, right? And that also was something that was to be learned by the Israelites. So already there's a little bit of a parallelism, but now the last bit of Parshat Vayeilech ends. Vayhi ki chalot Moshe lichtov et divrei haTorah azot al sefer ad tumam. When Moses had put down the writing, in writing, the words of this Torah, and now you know what? This is a mistranslation. In a book to the very end. Okay? Moses finished writing down the words of this book to the very end. And that starts to sound like something maybe a little bigger, or maybe it's Deuteronomy. Right? We've got plenty to play with here in terms of how we might interpret this. Moses charged the Levites who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Eternal, saying, "Take this book of the Torah, lakach et sefer Torah hazeh, and place it beside the Ark of the Covenant of your God, the Eternal." In case you thought that wasn't implied earlier, take this book and it'll be right there with the tablets. And that in itself is a move. Right? Moshe is taking this book and attaching it to the tablets, which were the record of the 10 utterances of God, and let it remain there as a witness upon you. Do you remember where we saw that before? Just above. The Shirah was a witness. The poem is a witness. Well, wait, now the Torah is a witness. Now, of course, they could both be witnesses, but like, that's interesting. We just wrote down the song as a witness. Now we're writing down the Torah as a witness. Maybe it's the same thing. And then if that weren't enough, listen to the way the Parsha ends. Well, I know how defiant and stiff-necked you are, even now while I'm still alive in your midst. This is, I actually think this is a pretty funny line. I know how defiant and stiff-necked you are, even now while I'm still alive in your midst. You have been defiant towards the eternal. How much more then when I am dead? It's like, when I'm not around, you're going to go crazy. Gather to me all the elders of your tribes and your officials, that I may speak all these words to them, and that I may call heaven and earth to witness against them. Sounds like he's about to speak out the words of Hazinu, right? That's what Hazinu says, heaven and earth, witness against them. So that all seems like the Hazinu is separate, a poem. For I know that when I am dead, you will act wickedly and turn away from the path that I enjoined on you, that in time to come, misfortune will befall you for having done evil in the sight of the eternal, whom you vexed by your deeds. Moshe ends on a grumpy note, not surprisingly. And then he says, then Moshe recited, Vaydaber Moshe bozne kol kahal Yisrael et divrei hashira hazot, ad tumam. And then Moshe recited the words of this poem, this song, this shirah, in the ears of the whole congregation, just like Hakel, just like that gathering ceremony, to the very end. To the very end. And to the very end is a phrase which echoes because we just heard it at the beginning of this passage, because the words of the Torah were written down in the book, ad tumam, to the very end. Okay? So Parshat Vayeilech itself is blurring the lines between the poetry and the prose of what we think of as Torah, as what we think of as the enduring witness and testimony from our people, from our prophet and from our God. What is it? Is it a book of instruction? Is it laws? And now we're asking real questions of what is the nature of Torah? Is Torah mitzvot primarily? Is it stories? Is it song? Is it poetry? Right? Is it divine revelation? Is it the encounter with the divine? Is it a record of our history? What is Torah? What is this book that we study? And as we ask that, let's also close by thinking about the book that we're talking about so much at this time of year, Sefer HaChaim, the book of life, the book of our lives. And let's think a little bit about what the book of our life is. How would we write down the legacy of our existence? That's what we're thinking about these days. And would we put it down in the form of prose, or would we write a poem? And would we give advice to the next generation, or would we just leave them something beautiful? What will be our sefer? What will be our book? What will be our witness to the next generation? That's something to think about as we head into these next holidays. Okay. Love you all. Thank you for your Torah. What a powerful, I just feel so gratified by this. And we will have class next week. We will indeed. We got to finish this Torah ad tumam, to the very end. Okay. See you next week. Kol tov.